I have a question for you.
Shoot.
Pakistan and Canada play cricket.
Yeah.
Who you Zindabading? In line with othering. So what I think is interesting about about our experiences is that we all kind of either grew up or spent a lot of time in a culture that wasn't our own or our parents' own, and in those experiences. So Majid, you're a Pakistan, like what? I mean, I've even thinking about it. Like you're a Pakistani, and that's not enough. Like that does not encompass everything that you are. So that's my first like thing with you. It doesn't encompass everything, and the second thing with you is that you're a Pakistani that grew up. You're an Emirati Pakistani, so you grew up in Dubai, and you're not even Emirati, Dubai Pakistani, and we all know how in the like Arab world and stuff, like there, just like there's racism everywhere, there's nationalism. I don't know if it's called nationalism, but there's isms everywhere, and so I wanted to sort of talk about. And Rashid, you have your sort of experience being a Palestinian in well, okay, there you go, the same issue. A ethnically Palestinian person growing up in Canada, in Toronto, in Scarborough, in a sort of immigrant neighborhood, if you will, with people from all over the place, um, uh, and with those two experiences and with sort of those backgrounds, and maybe you can reflect it a bit more on me, because I feel like I may have tasted of the appetizers of all this stuff when I went to Korea, when I went to when I've traveled, when I've been in other places, when I went to America and I was in the States for a while, and even in Saudi, right? Like being not real like Saudi in the sense that yeah, man, my parents are Saudi, but I spoke differently, I behaved differently, I thought differently. I didn't really have a lot of Saudi friends um, growing up, and so I kind of wanted to ask about that. I wanted to ask you what your thoughts were on that, and that's kind of what I'm bringing to the table today, boys.
Can I interject here now, please?
Please don't allow me to keep talking.
So this is where it gets really confusing on my end, and I'm pretty sure it's very similar for Rashid. I'm Pakistani in the sense that my parents are Pakistani, but legally speaking, from birth, I was born a Canadian citizen, and that has a deep impact throughout. Like growing up, knowing you're Canadian, it's a very different experience than being fully Pakistani. Uh, so I just want to clarify that if I was to thingy, it would be I'm Canadian Pakistani Dubaian. Like honestly, because that really does have a big impact on just everything.
I have a question for you.
Shoot.
Pakistan and Canada play cricket.
Yeah.
Who you Zindabading?
The winner. Always the winner, bro. I'm
Which
from
will always be Pakistan.
I'm from nah, bro. 2007, the year I lived in Ireland. Ireland played Pakistan, and that statement that you said, which will always be Pakistan, was supposed to hold. The one year I live in Ireland, Ireland defeated Pakistan in a very like stunning upset and everything. But again, I'm with the winner. That day I was Irish. We were all Irish that day.
You got your Guinness on that day in that case.
And by the way, yeah, too many good eyes. I also just want to take a step back. We were jamming out to some Rasha Taha earlier. He's an Arabic singer, and there's a quote of his on the Wikipedia, which is kind of relevant to all of this. Taha had a cosmopolitan group of friends. Look around us. Look at this very room. Taha was quoted as saying, I've never wanted to just stay in my own neighborhood, my own community. It's a kind of conformism. You have to be adventurous. With that, continue. Rasha, take it away.
So for me, growing up for a long time, yes, there was always the question as to what am I really in terms of identity, I guess you can say. And that really that's the gist of what we're getting at, I think, at times, your identity. And for me, I always had this caveat, and this caveat always related to saying that, okay, fine, I acknowledge my Palestinian roots, my Palestinian background, and I appreciate its history. I also understand that there's issues within Palestinian society that's existed for many generations. But for me, for a long time, and then people would ask me questions about the Palestinian-Israel conflict and all that kind of stuff. And so, yeah, I remember I studied that stuff in university, and then I would start to give my opinion. And then I remember I became friends with a girl who's from my dad's home city, Nablus, um, and just pen pals on Facebook and whatever. And at one point, I had this, I don't know if it was an epiphany or if it was just a thought where I said, do I really have the right to discuss this issue and give my opinions on what should or shouldn't happen because of the fact that I never lived through it? I never lived in the West Bank. I've never lived in Israel proper. So I don't know firsthand what these people have to go through on a daily basis. Or, I mean, the worst obviously is the Gaza Strip. And for her, her answer kind of was like, no, you have a right still. Obviously, you're not going to have the same type of insight as she would, for example, growing up in the West Bank. But it always came down to the fact that there's always this big question about Palestinians living in occupied lands or in Israel proper, or Palestinians in the diaspora. And there's always this attempt to unite the different types of communities so that, one, people in the diaspora don't forget about their Palestinian heritage and history. And two, so that the presence of the Palestinian nation or identity continues regardless of where people are. So that played a huge part in my thought process growing up. And then the other thought process is, well, in reality, culturally speaking, I'm very Canadian. So I used to enjoy, I don't watch hockey as much as I used to. Now I'd say I'm much more in terms of a breadth of North American in general, because the sports that I watch generally are not as popular in Canada. So for me, baseball, football, soccer, American football, basketball are pretty much the type of things that I stick to. But and golf, I love golfing. But I mean, like, how many Arabs would you meet that are going to say, "I love baseball"? Like, they like, what is this stupid thing? It's like you might as well watch cricket, and even still, they don't watch cricket, right?
And that's why I mentioned the Canadian thing for me. Like, I grew up in American schools, and so my first love sports wise was basketball.
Mm-hmm.
In the 90s, especially, you're not going to find many Indians or Pakistanis, the Desi community, who were into basketball. Like, the most they'll say is Michael Jordan. Do you know what I mean? And so, like, that was a very Canadian thing of me, or American or westernized, whichever one you want to pick. And that did have an impact. So while a lot, like 99% of my classmates were watching the latest Shah Rukh Khan movie, I was genuinely watching The Great Escape from 1963 or something. And
Mm-hmm.
there was a disconnect, or especially with hip hop. Like, for me, the biggest like divide was actually rap music. I love rap music. I understand what they're saying. At an early age, I kind of got the colorism thing as well. Just to go back full circle, Waseem, to what you wanted to talk about. Um, just by listening to the brothers in America, I could draw parallels to my own existence there. Because, like, on the surface, I'm Pakistani. So when, like, the outside world sees me, they see a Pakistani. But then when you speak to me, it's very clear I'm not, yeah, I'm definitely Pakistani, but I'm also something else.